One of the most important truths to understand before going back to a narcissist is this: their desire to have you back is often driven by very different motivations than the ones you hope for. When someone has spent months or even years loving, sacrificing, forgiving, and trying to make a relationship work, it's natural to believe that a narcissist's return means they have finally realized your value. It's natural to think that your absence has awakened something inside them, that losing you has helped them understand what they took for granted, and that now they want to make things right. Unfortunately, this is where many people become vulnerable to repeating the same painful cycle. A narcissist's relationship with other people is often rooted in what those people provide rather than who those people truly are. This does not mean they never experience emotions or attachments. It means that their emotional world is frequently centered around meeting their own needs, protecting their self-image, and maintaining a sense of control. As a result, when they reach out after a breakup, separation, or period of no contact, their focus may not be on repairing the damage they caused. Their focus may be on regaining access to something they lost. What exactly did they lose? They may have lost the person who constantly reassured them when they felt insecure. They may have lost someone who listened to their problems, supported their dreams, and provided emotional stability. They may have lost someone who forgave behavior that others would never tolerate. They may have lost a reliable source of attention, validation, admiration, and emotional energy. They may have lost the comfort of knowing that no matter how badly they behaved, someone would still be there waiting for them. The moment that source disappears, something shifts. Suddenly, the certainty they once relied on begins to crumble. The person they assumed would always remain available is no longer responding. The emotional supply they took for granted is no longer accessible. The influence they once held begins to weaken. This loss can create discomfort, frustration, anxiety, and even panic. From the outside, these reactions can look very similar to love. They can look like regret. They can look like heartbreak, but appearances can be deceiving. Imagine someone who always had access to a valuable resource. They never worried about losing it because it was always there. Then one day that resource disappears. Their attention immediately turns toward getting it back. Not necessarily because they suddenly appreciate it more, but because they have become aware of its absence. This dynamic often explains why a narcissist may seem far more interested in you after you leave than they did when you were trying desperately to stay. Many survivors become confused when the narcissist suddenly starts doing all the things they refused to do before. They send long messages, they apologize, they make promises, they express emotions they never showed during the relationship, they claim they have changed, they insist that things will be different this time. These behaviors can feel incredibly convincing because they directly target the hopes you've carried for so long. They present a version of the person you've been waiting to see. The problem is that genuine change requires far more than emotional words delivered during a moment of crisis. Real transformation is a slow process. It involves self-awareness, accountability, humility, and consistent effort over time. It requires a person to examine their own behavior honestly instead of blaming others for the consequences. It requires them to recognize the pain they caused without immediately making excuses for it. Most importantly, it requires them to maintain healthier behavior even when they are not getting what they want. When a narcissist wants you back, it is important to ask yourself a difficult question. Are they responding to your value, or are they responding to their loss of access? There is a significant difference between those two motivations. A person who truly values you is concerned with your well-being. They care about how their actions affected you. They respect your boundaries, even when those boundaries disappoint them. They want to rebuild trust because they understand that trust was broken. A person who is primarily motivated by loss of access tends to focus on restoring the previous arrangement. They want communication restored. They want emotional access restored. They want influence restored. They want the relationship restored. Yet they may show little interest in examining the deeper patterns that created the problems in the first place. This is why many narcissists become especially persistent when they realize they are losing control of the situation. The more independent you become, the more attractive you may suddenly appear. The more boundaries you establish, the more determined they may become to break through them. The more your life begins moving forward without them, the more urgently they may try to pull you back. What makes this dynamic so painful is that it often creates false hope. The survivor interprets the pursuit as proof of love. They believe the effort means the narcissist finally understands what they lost. They see the sudden attention and assume it reflects genuine appreciation. In reality, the attention may be fueled by something much simpler: the narcissist's discomfort with no longer having guaranteed access to the person they once took for granted. Understanding this distinction can protect you from making decisions based on emotion alone. It encourages you to look beyond the intensity of someone's return and examine the quality of their change. It reminds you that missing someone is not the same as respecting them. Wanting someone back is not the same as valuing them. Fighting to regain access is not the same as accepting responsibility. The most important thing to remember is that a narcissist's reaction to losing you often reveals far more about their needs than it does about their love. The return, the messages, the promises, and the sudden expressions of emotion may feel powerful in the moment. But before interpreting those actions as proof of transformation, it is essential to look carefully at what is truly driving them. Because when someone wants you back primarily to regain what you provided, rather than to honor who you are, the relationship remains centered on their needs instead of mutual respect, and that is where the cycle so often begins again. One of the most unsettling moments for a narcissist occurs when they realize they are no longer in control of the person they once influenced so easily. While many people assume a narcissist's greatest fear is being abandoned, rejected, or left alone, the deeper issue often lies elsewhere. What truly shakes them is the loss of control. It is the realization that someone they once manipulated, persuaded, confused, or emotionally managed has stepped outside of their reach. This experience can create a reaction far more intense than most people expect. Control is not always obvious. Many survivors imagine control as direct commands, threats, or demands. While those behaviors certainly exist, control within narcissistic relationships is often much more subtle. It can appear as guilt, silent treatment, emotional withdrawal, criticism, blame shifting, excessive charm, future promises, or carefully timed affection. Over time, these tactics create an environment where the narcissist becomes the center of the emotional experience. The other person begins adjusting their behavior to avoid conflict, gain approval, or maintain peace. Without even realizing it, many people start organizing their decisions around the narcissist's reactions. They think carefully before expressing opinions. They hesitate before setting boundaries. They second-guess their feelings. They become increasingly focused on managing the narcissist's moods instead of honoring their own needs. This gradual shift gives the narcissist a sense of influence that becomes deeply familiar and comfortable. As long as that influence remains intact, the narcissist feels secure. They know how to trigger a response. They know how to gain attention. They know how to create doubt. They know how to pull emotional energy from the relationship whenever they need it. The situation remains predictable because they understand the emotional buttons they have learned to press. Everything changes when those buttons stop working. The shock begins when the person they once controlled starts making independent choices. The survivor stops arguing, stops defending themselves, stops explaining every decision, stops chasing validation, stops reacting to provocations, stops trying to convince the narcissist to understand. For the first time, the narcissist encounters something they cannot easily manipulate: clarity. A person who has regained clarity becomes much harder to control because they are no longer operating from confusion. They begin recognizing patterns that once seemed invisible. They notice how conversations repeatedly shift away from accountability. They notice how apologies rarely lead to change. They notice how affection often appears when distance is created and disappears when access is restored. These observations weaken the narcissist's influence. What makes this so difficult for the narcissist is that control often serves as a source of emotional security. It reassures them that they still matter. It reassures them that they still have power. It reassures them that they can shape outcomes in ways that protect their self-image. When control disappears, those reassurances begin to disappear as well. This can create reactions that seem confusing to outsiders. A narcissist who appeared completely uninterested may suddenly become obsessed with reconnecting. A narcissist who ignored messages may suddenly send multiple messages. A narcissist who acted cold and detached may suddenly become emotional. A narcissist who dismissed the relationship may suddenly describe it as the greatest connection they ever had. To someone who still cares deeply, these behaviors can appear romantic. They can feel like evidence that the narcissist finally understands the value of the relationship, but often the intensity is connected to something else. The narcissist is confronting a reality they never expected. They are no longer controlling the narrative. For a long time, they may have believed they could return whenever they wanted. They may have assumed that a few kind words would erase previous behavior. They may have believed their influence would always remain available. The possibility that someone has truly moved on can be incredibly difficult for them to accept. This is especially true when the survivor begins thriving without them. Nothing challenges a narcissist's sense of control quite like witnessing someone become stronger after leaving. The survivor starts rebuilding confidence. They reconnect with friends. They pursue goals. They establish healthier boundaries. They begin making decisions without seeking permission or approval. Every sign of growth sends a powerful message. The influence that once existed is fading. For someone who relies heavily on control, this realization can feel threatening. The threat is not necessarily that they have lost a relationship. The threat is that they have lost authority over the emotional environment they once dominated. This explains why some narcissists react with anger when they discover their former partner is healing. Instead of feeling happy for the person's progress, they become irritated, jealous, dismissive, or determined to reinsert themselves into the person's life. The recovery itself becomes a reminder that their control is no longer as powerful as it once was. Many survivors are surprised by how quickly a narcissist's behavior changes when they stop responding emotionally. The same person who once seemed confident may become desperate. The same person who once acted indifferent may become persistent. The same person who once held all the power may begin chasing the very attention they previously took for granted. These reactions reveal an important truth. Control only feels powerful when it works. The moment it stops working, the person who depended on it is forced to confront a very uncomfortable reality. They cannot guarantee the outcome anymore. They cannot predict the response anymore. They cannot rely on old strategies anymore. For many narcissists, this uncertainty creates significant frustration. They may attempt new tactics. They may become unusually charming. They may offer apologies. They may create emergencies. They may seek sympathy. They may provoke arguments. They may attempt to trigger guilt. The specific tactic matters less than the goal behind it. The goal is often to reestablish influence, to regain access, to restore the dynamic that once made them feel secure. This is why understanding the loss of control is so important for anyone recovering from a narcissistic relationship. It helps explain behaviors that otherwise seem confusing. It reveals why someone's sudden interest may not be the same thing as genuine personal growth. It highlights the difference between a person wanting a healthy connection and a person wanting their old position of influence back. When survivors recognize this distinction, they become less vulnerable to emotional manipulation. They stop interpreting every dramatic reaction as proof of love. They stop assuming that urgency equals sincerity. They stop believing that pursuit automatically reflects transformation. Instead, they begin evaluating behavior through a different lens, not by asking how intensely the narcissist is reacting, but by asking whether genuine accountability, respect, and consistent change are present. Because a narcissist's strongest reaction often emerges at the exact moment they realize they can no longer control the person they once believed would always remain within their reach. One of the most misunderstood aspects of recovering from a narcissistic relationship is what happens during no contact. Many people enter no contact believing it is simply a strategy to stop communication, avoid arguments, or create distance from someone who has caused emotional pain. While it certainly accomplishes those things, the psychological impact goes much deeper. No contact is not just the absence of communication, it is the removal of access. It is the point where the narcissist can no longer rely on the emotional connection, attention, reactions, and influence that once existed. This shift often creates a powerful reaction, not only in the survivor, but also in the narcissist. For a long time, the narcissist may have become accustomed to a predictable pattern. They knew how to reach you. They knew how to get a response. They knew which words would trigger guilt, hope, fear, or confusion. Whether the interaction was positive or negative often mattered less than the fact that the interaction existed. Every conversation, every argument, every explanation, every emotional reaction reinforced the connection and confirmed that they still had access to your attention. This is why no contact can feel so disruptive. Suddenly, the pattern disappears. The messages go unanswered. The calls stop being returned. The explanations end. The emotional reactions vanish. The narcissist no longer receives the reassurance that they can reach you whenever they choose. At first, many narcissists do not take this seriously. They assume the silence is temporary. They believe you are upset and will eventually return. They expect the familiar cycle to resume because it always has before. Their confidence often comes from past experiences where apologies, promises, charm, or pressure successfully restored the relationship. But as time passes, something begins to change. The silence remains. The expected response never arrives. The emotional door they once walked through so easily appears closed. For some narcissists, this realization creates confusion. They struggle to understand why their usual methods are no longer working. They may send casual messages, testing whether the connection still exists. They may reach out with seemingly innocent questions. They may pretend to check on your well-being. On the surface, these interactions can appear caring or thoughtful. Underneath, they often serve another purpose. They are searching for evidence that access still exists. Even a small response can provide reassurance. Even a brief conversation can signal that the emotional connection remains available. This is why many survivors notice a sudden increase in contact attempts after they establish firm boundaries. The narcissist is attempting to determine whether the separation is real. As the silence continues, the psychological effects often become stronger. The narcissist begins losing something they may have taken for granted. They lose the ability to monitor your emotional state. They lose the ability to influence your decisions. They lose the ability to shape the narrative through constant communication. Most importantly, they lose certainty. Certainty is powerful. As long as they believed they could return whenever they wanted, there was little reason for concern. But no contact introduces uncertainty into the equation. They no longer know what you are thinking. They no longer know whether you still care. They no longer know whether someone else has entered your life. They no longer know whether their influence remains intact. For individuals who depend heavily on control, this uncertainty can become extremely uncomfortable. Many survivors imagine that the narcissist spends this period reflecting deeply on the relationship. While some reflection may occur, the process is often different from what people hope. Instead of focusing primarily on the pain they caused, the narcissist may become preoccupied with the loss of access itself. Their attention shifts toward the fact that something once available is no longer guaranteed. This can create a strong desire to reconnect, not necessarily because they have transformed, not necessarily because they fully understand the damage they caused, but because the absence is disrupting a familiar source of emotional security. The longer no contact continues, the more noticeable this disruption can become. The narcissist may begin cycling through different strategies. They may become charming and affectionate. They may offer apologies. They may express regret. They may attempt to create nostalgia by reminding you of positive memories. They may even acknowledge mistakes they previously denied. For survivors, these moments can be incredibly confusing. After all, these are often the exact behaviors they wished for during the relationship. The attention feels validating. The concern feels meaningful. The effort feels genuine. But timing matters. When meaningful change appears only after access is removed, it is important to examine the motivation behind it. Genuine growth is not measured by emotional intensity during a crisis. Genuine growth is measured by consistent behavior over time. No contact also affects the narcissist because it removes a source of emotional feedback. During the relationship, they may have relied on your reactions to regulate their own emotions. Your attention reassured them, your concern reassured them, even your frustration reassured them because it demonstrated engagement. Silence provides none of those things. Silence cannot be manipulated. Silence cannot be argued with. Silence cannot be blamed. Silence offers no emotional fuel. This is one reason why no contact can feel so powerful. It forces the narcissist to confront a situation they cannot easily control. They cannot rewrite a conversation that never happens. They cannot shift responsibility during an argument that never occurs. They cannot create confusion when there is no interaction to manipulate. As a result, some narcissists become increasingly persistent. Others become angry. Others appear wounded or desperate. The specific reaction varies from person to person, but the underlying issue often remains the same. They are responding to the loss of access. Meanwhile, something equally important is happening on the survivor's side. With every day of no contact, clarity begins returning. The constant emotional pressure starts fading. The confusion begins lifting. The dependency weakens. The person who once felt trapped inside the cycle starts seeing the relationship more objectively. This growing clarity represents something extremely significant because it reduces the narcissist's influence. The longer you remain outside the cycle, the easier it becomes to recognize patterns that once felt normal. You begin noticing how often your needs were minimized. You begin remembering the promises that never became reality. You begin understanding how much energy was spent trying to earn treatment that should have been given freely. From the narcissist's perspective, this process can be deeply threatening because every day of no contact increases the possibility that you will no longer view them through the same emotional lens. Every day creates more distance between their influence and your decision-making. Every day strengthens your ability to move forward without them. That is why no contact often triggers such a powerful psychological reaction. It removes access, removes certainty, removes influence, and removes the emotional feedback that once reinforced the connection. In doing so, it forces the narcissist to confront a reality they may have never expected. The possibility that the person they once believed would always remain available is finally learning how to live without them. One of the most dangerous misunderstandings people have after leaving a narcissistic relationship is believing that if the narcissist misses them, it automatically means they value them. This assumption feels natural because healthy relationships teach us to connect missing someone with love, appreciation, and emotional attachment. When two emotionally healthy people care about each other, missing one another is often a reflection of genuine affection. It comes from valuing the person, appreciating their presence, and recognizing the unique role they play in life. However, when dealing with a narcissist, the situation can be very different. What appears to be regret may actually be something else entirely. What looks like appreciation may simply be the discomfort of losing access to something that once benefited them. This distinction is critical because countless survivors return to unhealthy relationships after witnessing what appears to be sincere remorse. They see tears, they hear apologies, they receive emotional messages, they watch the narcissist become unusually attentive and vulnerable. Naturally, they assume these reactions prove that the narcissist has finally realized what they lost. They believe the pain of separation has created self-awareness. They hope the relationship's end has inspired genuine change. Unfortunately, missing someone and valuing someone are not always the same thing. A narcissist may miss the role you played in their life without fully appreciating who you are as a person. They may miss what you provided, they may miss what you tolerated, they may miss the comfort, attention, validation, support, and loyalty they received from you. They may miss having someone available whenever they needed reassurance. They may miss the security of knowing that someone was willing to prioritize their needs, even at the expense of their own well-being. These losses can create real emotional discomfort. The sadness may be genuine. The frustration may be genuine. The loneliness may be genuine. The sense of absence may be genuine. But genuine emotional pain does not automatically mean genuine appreciation. Many survivors struggle with this concept because they assume that intense emotions must reflect deep love. They see the narcissist suffering and conclude that the relationship must have been meaningful in a healthy way. Yet people can experience intense emotions for many reasons. Someone can be upset because they lost control. Someone can be upset because they lost convenience. Someone can be upset because they lost status, attention, or emotional support. The intensity of the reaction does not necessarily reveal the quality of the motivation behind it. Imagine a person who owns something valuable and reliable. They become accustomed to having it available whenever they want. Over time, they stop appreciating it because they assume it will always be there. Then suddenly it is gone. They feel the loss immediately. They notice the inconvenience. They notice the absence. They become focused on getting it back. Their distress is real, but the distress is centered on losing access rather than developing a new appreciation for its value. This dynamic often appears in narcissistic relationships. The narcissist may spend months or years taking you for granted. They may ignore your feelings. They may dismiss your concerns. They may refuse accountability. They may expect endless patience while offering very little in return. Yet the moment you leave, they become highly emotional and determined to reconnect. To the survivor, this sudden shift can seem like proof of transformation. After all, if they didn't care, why would they come back? If they didn't value me, why are they fighting so hard? If they didn't love me, why do they seem so devastated? These questions are understandable, but they can also be misleading. A narcissist can desperately want someone back without truly understanding that person's worth. They can crave access without respecting boundaries. They can fear losing a relationship without accepting responsibility for damaging it. They can feel lonely without becoming accountable. One of the clearest ways to distinguish regret from the loss of supply is by examining where the narcissist's attention is directed. Genuine regret focuses on the pain caused to another person. It acknowledges specific actions. It demonstrates empathy. It seeks to understand the emotional consequences of harmful behavior. It accepts responsibility without demanding immediate forgiveness. The loss of supply tends to focus elsewhere. The conversation often revolves around the narcissist's feelings, their loneliness, their suffering, their disappointment, their desire to reconnect, their fear of losing the relationship. Notice the difference. One perspective is centered on the injured person. The other is centered on the person experiencing the loss. This distinction can reveal a great deal about motivation. A person experiencing genuine regret wants to repair harm because they care about the person they hurt. A person reacting primarily to the loss of supply often wants to repair access because they miss the benefits they once received. Another important factor involves consistency. When regret is genuine, behavior changes even when immediate rewards are not guaranteed. The person remains accountable even if reconciliation never happens. They respect boundaries even if those boundaries prevent them from getting what they want. They continue demonstrating growth because they understand it is necessary. When someone is primarily responding to the loss of supply, change often becomes conditional. The effort increases when access is restricted and decreases when access is restored. Promises appear during separation but fade once the relationship resumes. Accountability becomes temporary rather than permanent. This pattern explains why so many survivors feel hopeful during reconciliation attempts only to experience disappointment later. The narcissist appears transformed while trying to regain access. Once that goal is achieved, old behaviors gradually return. The cycle repeats because the underlying motivation was never genuine personal growth. Understanding this difference can protect survivors from confusing emotional intensity with emotional maturity. A narcissist's tears may be real, their sadness may be real, their longing may be real. Yet those feelings do not automatically indicate that they have developed empathy, accountability, or respect. The ability to miss someone does not necessarily mean the ability to value them. Valuing someone requires recognizing their humanity, respecting their boundaries, caring about their well-being, and treating them with dignity even when it is inconvenient. It involves seeing them as a complete person rather than a source of comfort, validation, or emotional support. This is why survivors must look beyond expressions of loss and examine patterns of behavior. The most important question is not whether the narcissist misses you. The most important question is whether they have demonstrated the qualities necessary to build a healthy relationship, because someone can deeply miss the benefits you provided, desperately want you back, and still remain unwilling to become the kind of person capable of treating you with the respect you always deserved.